This is a Rogue Media Network podcast.
Do you ever have a story that you just can't get out of your head?
One that you play the details of over and over with your friends?
Well, you've come to the right place. I'm Claire.
And I'm Susan.
And this is Justice Pending,
a weekly true crime podcast where we discuss tantalizing crimes with more questions than answers.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Justice Pending. I'm Claire.
And I'm Susan, and today we're stepping into a storm of speculation, social media sleuthing, and something darker. 13 deaths in just a few months across the great states of New England.
So since March 2025, bodies, mostly women, have been turning up in woods, rivers, and remote areas across Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and even Maine. The deaths are unexplained. The causes vary, but the internet has a theory.
That's right. The internet believes it to be a serial killer, and maybe more than one.
The police are saying no, but the public isn't buying it. And the fear is very real.
So let's talk about what we know. 13 bodies in less than 4 months have been discovered, and that is just not normal.
Definitely not normal in this amount of time, in this region, and not with so many cases without answers. So the first known victim was a 35-year-old named Paige Fannin. Her body was pulled from Connecticut's Norwalk River on March 6th. On that same day, a human skull was discovered in the woods of Plymouth, Massachusetts.
Then less than 2 weeks later, on March 19th, the dismembered body of Suzanne Wormser, who was just 58 years old, was found stuffed in a suitcase in Groton, Connecticut. Her roommate was arrested, but died in custody shortly after. It's a whole other story.
Right. So from there, the list grows. Denise Leary in New Haven on March 25th. Michelle Romano found in the Rhode Island woods the next day. And then came unidentified remains in Killingly, Connecticut on April 9th. So Killingly, Connecticut, by the way, is a real place. I looked it up. I fact-checked it. Seemed a little on the nose, but it is actually called that. The pictures online actually look idyllic, but I gotta say that name is a little scary. But at this point, let's do the math. We're getting up to 5 mysterious deaths in the span of 1 month.
Wow, well, we'll keep going. So then 2 more bodies appeared in rivers on April 20th, one in the Seekonk River in Rhode Island, and the other in the Connecticut River near Rocky Hill. So April 22nd, well, just 2 days later, the body of 45-year-old Megan Meredith was found near a bike path in Springfield, Massachusetts. A little bit after that, April 27th, another body in Taunton.
And in May, 34-year-old Jasmine Wilkes was discovered in Edgewood Park in New Haven. Then, on June 1st, 21-year-old Adriana Sazo was found in the woods of Milton, just outside of Boston.
And that brings us to 13 bodies, with 13 different locations, and some identified, some not, some reportedly murdered, others reportedly undetermined, but they all share the one thing that is this big mystery.
Yes, and so social media did what social media does, and it started connecting the dots. You know, people were noticing that these different bodies were just popping up all over New England. And so someone created a Facebook group called New England Serial Killer, and it quickly grew to over 9,000 members.
Yeah, and posts in that group triggered real-world searches, including a beach in Rhode Island where rumors suggested multiple bodies had been buried. Sounds a lot like Gilgo Beach, actually.
Right.
But that, I'm sure it was inspired by that. But that search actually turns up actually nothing was there. And it was based on what they're calling a hoax.
Yeah, so the police felt, strongly whenever they got this tip that it was probably a hoax, but you have to check things out whenever, you have something like potential bodies. Like, you don't just want to be like, it sounds like a hoax. Like, you want to take that extra step. So they brought out the manpower, they searched the beach, but they found nothing. So you really hate to think that somebody's out there like just making a sick joke. But it does sound like that's what happened in this case. But the rumors, they've continued to crop up.
They have. I mean, it's not hard to see why. It's
Yeah.
it's very odd. It's not like this is a part of the world where we see multiple bodies and form. Just
Yeah,
for,
this isn't, yeah, and it isn't like a crime ridden area. Like,
no, no,
it's not, yeah. They don't
yeah,
seem to be like people who are involved in gangs or drugs or, doing the type of risky work or behavior that, could lead to this death. Like, we have people like on bike paths, we have people in hotels. Like, it doesn't make a lot of sense.
yeah. It's strange. I mean, the locations where these bodies are being found are mostly wooded, secluded, or watery. The victims are mostly women, and they're found alone. So yeah, it does seem just very strange.
Yes. So investigators say there's no forensic evidence linking these deaths. They're, taking samples from all of the victims. There's no matching DNA. There's no common cause of death. No suspect profile, that fits across the board. So, what people are looking for, if they're looking for like a trend, they're looking for a single killer. Usually you'll have something like all the victims were strangled or all the victims were stabbed. And that's not, what's being shown in these cases. They have no commonality.
Right. So one of the states where this is happening is Connecticut. And Connecticut State Police have been especially vocal, saying outright that there is no information at this time suggesting any connection to similar remains discovery. Like, there's no threat
Yeah.
to the public, nothing in common, nothing to see here. Very sad. We're on it. We're investigating. There's no serial killer.
Yes. And so after the Groton police solved their case, arresting a suspect who knew the victim, this was the person who was stuffed in a suitcase. They reiterated that the case had no connection to any other deaths in the state or the region.
That was the Suzanne Wortzer, right?
Right, Suzanne Wormser. So, I mean, that's where the suspect died in custody. It was like a fate or someone known to the victim. And so obviously that person could have been a serial killer, right? And this could have been one of their victims, but the murders wouldn't have continued. And they did. So,
Yeah, even the FBI joined to assist the Groton Police Department. They declined to comment on any potential link between the cases. They've made it clear that they're treating each one separately.
yeah, but the fact that the FBI is, joining the hunt does give some serial killer vibes, does it not?
It does. It does. Crossing state lines. Yes.
So New Haven PD, they said the same thing about their case of Denise O'Leary. So they said that while her cause of death is undetermined, there were no signs of trauma. So her remains were found just blocks from her home, and they don't suspect foul play. A lot of times, if authorities don't believe a crime was committed, they might withhold information simply out of privacy concerns for the family. Of course, that's not very satisfying to people who are trying to, put these pieces together. But we have to remember that, if they believe that this woman died of natural causes, they have every right to protect her privacy.
Totally. But, what if, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's what people are saying and still speculating. And, what's feeding this public suspicion is really human nature. I mean, we're looking for patterns. We're grasping for patterns. We want
Yep.
explanations. It is really scary to think that, all of a sudden that there's 13 bodies being discovered. So, that's what's fueling this currently.
Yeah, we don't want to think that just, we just live in constant chaos and 13 people could just randomly be killed by 13 others, that it's
Yeah.
not connected, right? it's natural to look for some kind of explanation. But I think the true crime mindset does make you maybe see something like a serial killer, which is statistically so rare. But to see that, in the shadows, I think we can all kind of picture the Netflix special or the podcast in our
Right.
minds, making the case that these are all connected and finding that, smoking gun or that piece of evidence that puts it all together.
Yeah. And what really does make this whole thing feel so eerie isn't just the number of deaths, but the kind of the silence around them, the media, the police department. I mean, they didn't
Yeah.
want to talk about this. So there are so many still under investigation, and some of the victims still haven't been identified. And that vacuum of information breeds fear.
Yeah, absolutely. People are always afraid of things that they don't understand, that they can't explain. And, we have to remember that when a body is found in the woods or in water, even more problematic in water, it takes time. It takes time to put the pieces of the puzzle together to not only figure out who this person was, but, how they may have died and who could be responsible. And so, this is something that in an ideal situation might take weeks or months and oftentimes takes years, and we're looking at just a pretty short time frame here, just a matter of months since these murders have occurred. So criminologists have pointed out that there's no real victimology here. A lot of times if you are dealing with a serial killer, not only will you have a common cause of death, but you will also typically have some type of victim profile, a similar age, race or circumstance. Most serial killers have a type. It might be something as simple as, the color of their hair. But that's not what we're seeing here. We're seeing all sorts of variety, ages ranging, from the 50s to the 20s. And so that's another point in the law enforcement theory of these not being related.
Yeah, and I think, big picture patterns is something that people want, but let's not forget that these are real people. These aren't case
Yeah.
numbers, these aren't a body count, it's not a Reddit thread. So we should just keep that in mind too.
Yeah, and the families are really looking for answers. So, one case, Adriana Suzo was 21. Her sister Melanie described her death as suspicious. She was found alone in the woods. There was no obvious trauma, no clear cause of death. Melanie said, that she believes that her sister was with someone when she died or before. She doesn't think she went, out into the woods alone. So that's one of those that, there's just so many unanswered questions.
Yeah. I mean, there's Jasmine Wilkes, 34, Megan Meredith, 45, Michelle Romano, 56, Paige Fannin, 35, Denise Leary, 59. I mean, these are different women, different ages, and all with families who now live with these unanswered questions.
Yeah. And I mean, it's easy to get caught up in the mystery, but, we really do want to be respectful and stay grounded in the facts and, keep their names in the conversation because, no matter who's responsible for these deaths, like every one of these victims represents a family that's desperately searching for answers. And, I can only imagine, what it would be like not only to have something like this happen in your family, but then you don't know, who's responsible. And then it becomes part of like this serial killer theory and like a, viral social media trend. That's got to be pretty bizarre.
I agree. I mean, I do think there is something to keeping their names in the conversation
Yeah.
because it does tend to add pressure to law enforcement to solve. So I do think, keeping their names going is important. But a lot of it's really caught a lot of attention across the country. We have some experts that weighed in on it. There's an author, Maureen Boyle. She wrote "Shallow Graves" about a real New England serial killer from the 1980s, and she even agrees that the current speculation could be harmful.
Yeah, so her warning, was that just because bodies are found in a variety of places in New England does not mean that a serial killer is on the loose. So, as someone who's actually studied serial killers, this author, I think her perspective is valuable. And to your point earlier though, Susan, I do agree that in some ways it's like almost anything that keeps the victims' names
Mhm.
on the tip of the tongue, it's beneficial to a point. I mean, I look at it as so many cases just languish in cold case files whenever police don't get, immediate information, and they can get inundated with other cases that are easier to solve with new cases. Um, and so sometimes having it out in media can be really helpful for law enforcement to pay attention. So it's kind of a double-edged sword there.
It is. And so there's even been a retired police chief who spoke up about this.
Yeah.
New Britain Police Chief James Wardwell said investigators should share information, not work in silos. Kind of a great reminder.
Yep.
He stopped short of saying the cases were connected, but he does have some experience in this realm. He actually helped catch confessed serial killer William Devon Howell.
Yeah, so I went down the rabbit hole on this one. William Devon Howell, I had not heard of this serial killer,
Yeah.
but it was relatively recent. So it was 2015 when Howell confessed to killing 6 people.
Mhm.
And the remains of his victims were all found buried in a wooded area behind a shopping center in New Britain, Connecticut.
Yeah, so this goes back to typically serial killers have a pattern. I
Yep.
mean, it's very same thing we referenced Gilgo Beach earlier. I mean, there's usually something in common. So in this case, yes, he buried them all in the same place. Serial killer.
Yes,
And
yeah. And so he confessed to killing 6 people, but would you actually believe there's a seventh victim who was also buried there? So at the time that Howell confessed, he was already in prison for that case. It was a manslaughter charge. But it was just wild to me to think that 7 bodies could be buried in, the same wooded area. Yeah, I'm also reminded of another serial killer that I covered when I was a producer for 48 Hours on CBS. It was Todd Colehep. Do you remember that one?
I don't.
So this was a South Carolina, Greenville, South Carolina case, and he was a real estate agent. And he had his regular house, like in the suburbs, and then he had this remote property that he called the beach, actually. You were triggering me with your comments, but so yeah, he used to hire people like on Craigslist to clean houses for him
Mhm.
for his real estate showings and stuff. And
Yeah,
then
I remember now.
yeah,
Yeah.
he would like basically be checking them out to see like if they would make good victims. And then he would usually um it was usually women. He would kill them in right away if the guy responded to the ad. But the women he would actually keep alive for some period of time on his property. It's really the stuff of nightmares. But yeah, they found, gosh, I don't remember how many bodies. I want to say like 5 or 6 on his property, but it was extensive. Um,
Wow.
but yeah, that was Todd Colehep in Greenville, South Carolina. People couldn't believe that a real estate agent was a serial killer. That was definitely an unusual one. So yeah, I mean, if all the bodies are in the same location, it certainly makes it a lot easier. But no less horrific.
Yeah. I mean, so back to New England and
Yeah.
what we're dealing with now, is there a serial killer operating? I mean, there's no evidence to say yes at this time.
Right. We have a body count. There's evidence that something's off. We have a
Mhm.
cluster of unexplained deaths, and a public who's losing trust in the official story.
Yeah, it's easy to call these internet rumors. Harder to look the families in the eye and say we don't know, which is what's happening right now with the police.
Yeah, and I mean, that's why these stories matter. Even if they're not connected, even if there's no tidy narrative, every one of these 13 victims deserves justice, and so do their families.
Yeah. So, I think we'll keep following the investigation and let you know if anything changes.
Yeah, please reach out on our website, justicepending.com, about this case or about any others. And until then, stay curious, stay skeptical, and most of all, stay safe. Justice Pending is recorded in Dallas, Texas for Rebel Studios. It's hosted by me, Claire Sanama, and Susan Passoni. Our theme music is Bending Truth, licensed at premiumbeat.com. We appreciate all listener feedback. Leave a review wherever you're listening right now, and we might read it on the air. Thanks for joining us.